So we took a community sample of 67 children with ASD, and we were interested in looking at the relationship between anxiety and social competence in individuals on the spectrum as compared to their typically developing peers. They did not have intellectual disability. They were between the ages of 6 and 14. And we had about 34% of the children who had a diagnosed comorbid mental health condition. 8 children with ASD had more than one. That's about 12% of our sample. And it was much, much lower in the typically developing sample. We used some measures to look at autism symptoms, symptoms of generalized anxiety, those general worries that children often express, and also depression symptoms. The multidimensional social competence scale was used. It's a parent report to look at different social competencies of children, young children, and teenagers as well. So we won't go too much into the characteristics. I'll get right down to the conclusions that there's an underdiagnosis of mental health symptoms in these individuals. 9% were diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, and 34% had levels of anxiety symptoms that fell in the clinically significant range. Contrast that with 1% and 15% in the typically developing youth. And 48%, this surprised us. We actually found much higher rates of depression than we expected. So 48% had levels of depression symptoms that fell in the clinically significant range, as compared to 15% in the typically developing youth. We looked at the core symptoms of depression versus the social symptoms of depression. So we wanted to know, is this just about autism and having social difficulties, or is it truly depression symptoms that are core, like I feel like I want to die, I'm very sad, those self-dislike and things like that. And when we looked, I'm sorry if this is hard to read, when we looked at the core symptoms versus the social symptoms, we didn't see differences. In fact, the parents were endorsing core symptoms as much as the social symptoms. So when we did a hierarchical multiple regression analysis to see if anxiety was predicting social competence, we found that yes, in fact it does. Depression was strongly and significantly predictive of social competence in both the typically developing kids and the kids with ASD, above and beyond age, IQ, and gender. But generalized anxiety was not in the ASD kids, it was in the typically developing kids. So those general worries were not so significant in their social competence, but the depression was. So in terms of practical implications, anxiety and depression symptoms need to be monitored regularly in these youth, and we need to also look at the core features of depression. Because they are present and they need to be addressed. I think sometimes parents as well might dismiss those as, being part of, having a developmental disability like autism, but they are in and of themselves very concerning and need to be addressed. So we know that social competence is a core problem of youth with ASD, so the social difficulties and the mental health difficulties go hand in hand. So we need to start thinking about what are the social problems and what are the mental health problems, and how do these two things feed into each other. It's likely that it's a reciprocal interaction going on. And so when we do have a mental health problem, we need to look at what's the social situation, what are the social competencies that this child has, and vice versa. When we know that there are some significant social incompetencies, we need to address those because they might likely be associated with mental health problems. I have some resources here for those of you who are interested. There are some free screening tools online, really useful tools. We also have some data we haven't published yet on self-report that is very, it's actually quite valid and reliable in kids with ASD. So you are able to use self-reports with these kids. And if you want more, we have some references that I didn't put up in the talk that we have available if you want to contact our lab, autism lab at SFU. Thank you.